Hey, hello and welcome. So I think what is the second of the WebYeshiva's classes this Pesach, talking about the order of the Seder, one shir on each part of the Seder. So I think there was a Kadesh, now we're up to Urchatz. So what is this thing called Urchatz? Now we know what it is, although we don't actually know what it is because some people have everybody wash. In my Seder, only the leader of the Seder washes and then doesn't make a bracha. And then we have the karpas, which is some kind of a vegetable dipped in, some people do potatoes, which I think is a starch rather than a vegetable, but parsley, vegetable, radish, whatever it is, dipped in salt water. So the question is, what's going on with this whole thing, and what are we doing it for, and what meaning does it have, if any? Right? Those are the questions that I was hoping we would get a chance to think about a little bit and to see it. So as with anything, not anything, but as many things in Judaism, there's more literal technical readings, and at the end we'll get to some symbolic readings as well. So let's see what our sources tell us. So if you look at number one in the sources in front of you, Gemara Pesachim says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Oshaya, Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Oshaya, Kol sheti b'lo mashket. This is a general rule, but that we learn, that we visit, that we meet in the context of the Pesach Seder. The general rule is that the idea of washing our hands before eating isn't actually about bread. The idea of washing hands before eating is about anything where there's an idea of tumah, there's an idea of the possibility of transfer of some kind of ritual status to it, and therefore it needs to tell you that. Now, why would it be tibulo b'mashkeh? Why is it only vegetables or produce that have been dipped in something liquid? Anybody know the answer to that question? Feel free to answer in the chat boxes, and I can pick up on your answers. So it has to do with the fact that when we first harvest anything, let's say an apple, pluck an apple off of a tree, that apple is not yet mekabel tuma. It's not yet susceptible to anything, meaning if it touches a corpse, so somebody who passed away, normally food that touches a corpse, touches something like tuma, will get tummy. But it has to become wet first. It has to become wet on purpose. So that's tibulo b'mashkeh. Tibulo b'mashkeh gives it the ability, the vulnerability to becoming tummy. So therefore we wash our hands before, and as we do with bread, to remind ourselves of the idea that our hands are very often in contact with the sources of tumah, because you never know where your hands have been, so we wash our hands. So back in the Gemara now, back in source number 1, at the end of the first line, Gemara Papa Shmamina, he says, we learn from this, he says, from that we learn that when it comes to lettuce, which was in the time of the Gemara the expected thing that we would eat for maror, because at the time of the Gemara, our topic isn't maror, so I won't say too much about it. But the Gemara seemed to think of lettuce as being something that was very bitter. Now, not immediately bitter, but it left a bitter after experience. So I always wonder every year when we have in my family we have romaine lettuce for maror. That was always our tradition. But I always wonder about it because romaine lettuce is something that I eat during the year for salad. One day, God willing, very soon, we'll have a Sanhedrin and we will revisit these issues. But in any case, he says you have to dip it in the charoset. And this was the original reason why we have charoset. Charoset is the mixture of apple and wine and nuts that we, I think apples, wines, and nuts. I think that's how you make charoset that you have on the Seder plate, mishum kappa, because their chasa, their lettuces, had some kind of a poison element to them. It was thought to be dangerous to eat them straight, and if you dipped it in the charoset, that would negate that problem. Now, how's he getting that from the first line? How do those lines connect to each other? So Rabbi Elazar of Oshia had said, yeah, if it's dipped, you have to wash your hands. He's saying, since we see ourselves washing our hands before the karpas, and notice they seem to have eaten the same thing for karpas as they ate for maror. It seems like that. We don't do that anymore for other reasons. Today's shir is not a karpas shir. I'm not going to talk about that either, but it seems like they often ate the same thing for both. So he's saying, clearly you have to dip it in the charoset, and that's why you have to wash for it. Because after all, he says, if you didn't have to dip it, I'm not reading inside, but it's the second and third lines of number 1. If we didn't have to dip it, then why would we wash our hands? And we haven't touched anything. And Ella and Tila Daim trays in there on it. So why do we wash our hands twice? Hamash and the other chadazim. Now, of course, it's okay, fine. But if you're going to wash your hands at Urchatz at the beginning of the meal, then why do you wash it again before Hamotzi? So Amrei in the fourth line, number 1, came and diboy lememar agadita The Hilela, Dilma Asuche Asche Ledate Menachos. The answer is because there's a long time, because we told the whole Pesach story between, and therefore the washing we do at Urchatz can't count for later. So that's the basic Gemara. So this has to be in the, somebody says to me in the chat box, how does the washing our hands negate the tumor of the wet vegetable? No. Washing our hands doesn't negate the wet vegetable doesn't automatically become tamei. It's not that once a vegetable is wet, it is tamei. Once a vegetable is wet, if it has contact with something tamei, then it can become tamei. Right? It can only, so let's say, dead rodent of some sort, right? The sheret, the dead sheret, touches a vegetable that's never been wet. Okay? So that can't become tamei. But if it's become wet, then it can't. So that's the answer. Okay, good. So you got that. Good. Source number 2, Rashi says on this idea, hands are always considered to be what's called a sheni l'tuma, and therefore he says, if it's posel in truma, then it makes the wet. Rashi thinks that the hands themselves would make the vegetable tamei, because since the vegetable is wet, the hands are a sheni, and the vegetable is now wet, so it's susceptible to tumah, and therefore we wash our hands ahead of time to make sure to remove that tumah. Tells us something else, and this part of it is the technical part. I'll just read it to try to get some clarity on it, but it's not, to me, as exciting. The Tosot says, quotes Rashi, and then Tosot points out, we have a Gemara in Chulin that says, in the first line of number 3, we have a Gemara in Chulin that says, if you wash your hands for fruit, you're being arrogant. Meaning it's as if you're so religious, or I'm so religious, look at me, I even make sure to watch for vegetables. It's true. There's this rule on the books that would make washing vegetables a good idea, or for fruit a good idea, but it's arrogant, right? Because, so the Kaimalon, I'm in the second line number 3, that anything that's posel and true, so you have all these things about why it should be true. So therefore, Tosfos is something completely different. Then Tosfos says, that the netila da'acha in the third line, number 3, that the washing of our hands isn't because of kedusha or cleanliness, like with bread, which what he thinks is for bread. It's rather because we can't drink water or mashkin or any kind of a liquid that we've made tamei, because it makes ourselves tamei. We're not supposed to do that. So he has a whole different view of it. He thinks it's self-protection in terms of tumah. But then in number 4, Tosfos continues. The Omar Nami b'Seder Haseba, he violated yayin kol akad notil yado akad pirshli tamei hayayin. And he thinks it's about trying to make sure that the water and the wine and the liquid that we're ingesting don't absorb any kind of a tumah, and therefore we wash our hands to make sure to avoid that. So with wine, we wash one hand because we're only going to use one cup, but with maror, we're going to use both hands, and therefore we wash with both hands. All good. But then Tosfos says, according to this, meaning Tosfos just argued that when we wash for bread, it's not purely about tumah. What Tosfos is saying that when we wash for bread, it's about kedusha, which is a different thing. It's about elevating ourselves and eating with a proper cleanliness and overall sanctity. So Tosfos now says in the second line of number 4 that according to his distinction, it seems like you should make a bracha on the washing of our hands. Why? Because there's no mitzvah here to wash, right? And Rabbi Elazar ben Arak had said in Chulin that if you wash, you're arrogant, so we don't do that, right? So, and by the way, he says, and we don't do this throughout the rest of the year. It's not like we're careful about tumah and tahara the rest of the year and in general, and therefore, those things is not a bracha. So the question will be, if we're not usually so careful about tumah and tahara, about these kinds of issues, how come all of a sudden tonight, meaning I've known people who were careful, I was told, were careful to wash before they ever had fruit or vegetables that had been washed themselves, they would wash. But that's not our general practice. So if it's not our general practice, then we have to ask ourselves, why is it that all of a sudden on Seder night, we're making sure to wash, especially if only the leader of the Seder washes, as is true, I think, in many families, then it's not even about this. Because if you tell me, oh yeah, the worry is that your hands are officially tamei, and therefore maybe you'll make the liquid tamei and you'll ingest it, you should do that, you should do that. It's all fine at a technical level, except we don't do this in our usual lives. And for many families, we don't even do it at the Seder. We only have one person do it. So what's going on? So we'll get to that a little bit later. I want to just point out here, Tosul says, but those dissonances within our practice make very clear that we shouldn't make a bracha. Right? You can't tell the bracha would be, I'm making a bracha because there's a rule we should wash our hands before we eat these things. There may have been a rule like that, but it's not a rule that we currently follow in general. We're not currently careful about this. We're not currently. So how can you make a bracha? That's the claim of Tosafot. Okay? So far, the fruit could be tummy already. It could be true, but at the Seder night, it's often true that we buy new vegetables and then we wash them particularly for the Seder. Or we have new romaine lettuce, which we nowadays will have washed before the Seder, but we're going to dip into the thing. But you're right. You could argue that these fruits and vegetables or whatever we're eating has already been tamei some other time, and therefore our washing is purely symbolic. That's not what Tosfos says, but you're absolutely correct. So here's where we are so far. We have a Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara in Pesachim tells us that in general, one should wash their hands before eating fruits or vegetable produce that has been wetted with one of the 7 liquids that leads to possible tumah. That's what the Gemara says. And from there we understood and we inferred that shows that mortar has to be dipped, and that's what we want to make sure to wash. We don't wait to wash we don't rely on our earlier washing for the mortar, because we had a long story in between, so we washed twice, and that's why we washed twice. That's how we start. But then, if that's true, we had a debate. Rashi tells about why that is exactly, the details of which I don't think are so vital. But then Tosfos says, but clearly the reason, which is connected to the issue of Tumah and Tar, which is connected to our practices around these kinds of ritual statuses, can't be relevant today because we don't do it anywhere else, and therefore there can't be a bracha for it. That's Tosfos' claim. Now look at the Rambam in number 5. The Rambam in number 5 says, coming up in the 8th chapter, he says, V'omer alav kiddush hayom, we make kiddush, right? We take a cup of wine, we pour the cup of wine, we make kiddush. Then he says, V'achar kach, v'varech al netilat yadayim, v'notel yadav, u'mivin shulchan aruch v'alav maror v'yerek. The Rambam just treats it like a regular situation. He thinks that you're going to have some produce that's been dipped. If it's been dipped, you have to wash. So you wash, you make a bracha on the washing, you make a bari priyadama, and then you take the vegetable, you dip it in salt water, and you eat it. So the Rambam sees no problem. Now, it's not clear if the Rambam thinks we should do this all throughout the year. That might be true, and that might be the Rambam. But certainly there's a machloket. Rambam and Tosfos, they disagree about whether there's a bracha for Urchatz. Says the Lavush. The Lavush is a student of the Ramah in source number 6. So that means he's living in the late 1500s, early 1600s. The Lavush writes, "Nagush lo levarech arachar netilah, shlefemim yadayim nikiyot v'ino chol levarech kodem. V'kach nagush lo in varkim arachar kach v'od kef." So he's talking about washing hands in general. He says the custom became in washing hands in general not to make the bracha until after we wash. This is not our topic right now, but it is an Urchatz kind of an issue, right? Were we making a bracha? When should we make that bracha? So notice the Rambam had written, you wash hands. The Rambam had written, you make a bracha on the yadayim, v'notel yadav, and then wash your hands. Why would the Rambam say it that way? Right? The Rambam would say it that way because we always make our bracha before we do the action. When do you make a bracha on Shabbos candles? When do you make a bracha on tefillin? We make the bracha on Shabbos candles. Now we make it after we light, but before we officially light, that's a side view. That's not a great example. We make a bracha, right? We make the bracha in general before we light, right? So we make the bracha on Hanukkah candles before we light the Hanukkah candles. The Rabbi says the same thing about washing our hands. If we're washing our hands, because Chazal said to wash our hands, we make the bracha beforehand. Tells us that we don't make any bracha. Lavush points out where he's living in Poland, where he's living in Eastern Europe, they make the bracha after washing hands, as all of us do. So he says, because sometimes our hands aren't clean, and that's why we're washing them partially. And if they're not clean, we shouldn't make a bracha on them, because we don't make a bracha with dirty hands. And because that's true, sometimes the custom became not to make a bracha until after we wash our hands. And then he adds, and by the way, since we make the bracha before we dry our hands, now, I know many people, I think I probably do it a lot too, I forget, Many people make the bracha as they're wiping their hands. But the Levush is saying that's not correct because you want the bracha, we always want the bracha to be before the action, or at least before the action is completed. So if you told me that I'm going to wipe my hands a little bit even after the bracha is over, okay. But that's what he says people do. That makes it also before the performance of the mitzvah, performance of this issue, and therefore that works because the nigu of the wiping is part of the mitzvah. That's the way the Levush is. Levush's comment is not about Urchatz at all directly, but it's a reminder to think about Urchatz. So if we were making a bracha on the Urchatz, where would we make it? We make the bracha before we wash. That's the Rambam's idea. Or we make it before we wipe our hands, dry our hands. That's the Levush's idea. Says the Kovetz Shitot, which is source number 7. He's quoting from the Machzor Vitri. Machzor Vitri was written is a Seder. Just a side point. There were many centuries where Sidurim were books of halacha for many plain Jews. And the people who wrote Sidurim knew that. They knew that people would rely on that, and therefore they would include in the Siddur all sorts of halachic comments. Right now, many Sidurim have halachic comments, but mostly about prayer. But these Sidurim would have halachic comments about lots of things. So the Siddur, a Machzor Vitri, included the Seder. It included like a mini Haggadah in the Siddur. And so he says, Seder Shesider Ben Shlomo Bar Yitzchak. He's a student of Rashi. So he tells us this is the Seder that Rashi gave us. Then Urchatz Karpas, right? That's what we have. Then he writes, Benotel Yadav, Umivarech, Al Yirakot B'rei Pradama. The person washes their hands and then makes a bracha on the vegetables, Bar Pradama. What does this lead out? Meaning it looked like Tosfos was the one who said it, but now we realize that Rashi also said that. What did Rashi also say? No bracha on this washing. So we're confronting the fact that at the beginning of our Seder, we have something that we do. It looks like it has a halachic reason behind it. This whole idea that when we dip produce in any kind of a liquid, we should wash before eating the produce. And yet it turns out that the Ashkenazic perspective was that it wasn't really so much of a mitzvah, because if it was really that halakha in play, we would think we'd make a bracha on it, as the Rambam did think. So it looks like we're finding out that Rashi already, as Machzor Vitri teaches us, Rashi already recognized this isn't really what it looks like. This isn't really washing because of that. And so then what's the washing for? So then we have Sefer Seder Yom. It's a much later Sefer. It's the 16th century, right around the time of Rav Yosef Karo, the Shulchan Aruch, also in Tzvat. And he might be a little bit younger, and he writes also a book about as they say here in the biography, it's mystical legal ethics arranged according to the order of the day. It's a halacha book, not so different from, it's different in its presentation, but not so different from what Shulchan Aruch himself was doing, right? So, and they note here, I looked it up, it's not true, but they know that many of the commentators of Shulchan Aruch cite and rely upon and decide halachic issues. Not many, but some. So in any case, he says, in number 9, after we make Kiddush, Urchatz Yadav, right? He should wash his hands. He's going to eat something dipped in a liquid, a karpas. Mitubal b'chometz is dipped in, so chometz means vinegar. We do it in salt water. Same idea though. So he says, it's true, many people say we shouldn't wash. Now, he's living in Tzfat, which means he's mostly a Sephardi, I'm pretty sure. The Rambam's tradition was we do make a bracha, but by his time, it seems like the worries of Rashi and Tosfos have made their way to the Sephardic world. And he says, there's a debate about this bracha, whether we make it or not. Now, we say it's a debate about the bracha, but the way Rashi and Tosfos presented it, they weren't saying we're not sure about the bracha. They were saying that since this action is so clearly symbolic rather than halachic. Why is it so clearly symbolic rather than halachic? It's clearly symbolic rather than halachic because we don't do it the rest of the year. Because these aren't concerns that we're involved in the rest of the year. So that's why they say it. But by the time it makes its way to Moshe ben Yehuda ibn Machir, so by the time we say that, so he's saying no. So now it's a debate. We don't know, and therefore you don't make a bracha. However, he said Rosh Levrach b'Shem Malchus aval yivarech below haskara. I've never seen this done. He thinks, in other words, this is a suffix issue, and we're not making the bracha only because he's suggesting because of a debate. Then make the bracha, just don't say the name of God. That's the big worry. Which is an interesting point because it's not clear that we don't do that other place. We don't say in general where there's a suffix bracha, make the bracha without God's name to it. That's not a general practice. I've never seen it done here either. But that's his idea. So it was an interesting idea to include it. Somebody says to me, it all seems like it has to be different because we say so during the Manishtana. Now, it seems so during the Manishtana, right? We say that the rest of the night, we don't dip things even one time. And tonight we dip twice. The question is that a comment about the fact that we wash twice or that we dip foods twice? So that would be a Manishtana kind of question. That, again, is not our topic in this year. So I'm going to leave that for another time. But I think it's a question. I'm not sure. I think the Manishtana is probably more about the fact of dipping than the question of whether we wash our hands for it or not, I think. In any case, but this Sefer Seder Hayom says what I just said we don't do. He said we do it in general. He said wherever you have a bracha that we're not going to make because there's a doubt about it, you should make the bracha anyway, as long as you don't say the name of Hashem. Make the bracha in your heart, and that's the way it should happen, right? So, and there are others who claim such a thing, but not so many, right? And that's not this common practice. So, we have two versions now of not making a bracha, not reciting a bracha when it comes to Urchatz. One version, Rashi tells us that since this is an odd action of ours that doesn't fit our general halakhic practice, we shouldn't make a bracha on it because it's not a thing that we think of as obligatory because we never do it the rest of the year. It's not like we say the rest of the year, it's better to do this, but nebuch, most of us are just too weak. We don't really make an issue of it the rest of the year, right? So that's where we are. So that's what Rashi does seem to be saying. But then, since the Rambam says, no, we make a bracha, so you have Rabbi Gidon Rothstein and a few others, Sephardic poskim, who say, don't make the bracha because it's a suffix, but maybe make it silently or make it without the name of God. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, late 1800s, early 1900s, major Ashkenazic posek. He says, Kol shetibulo mashketzer k'dayim, right? That's what we say in Psachim, that we started with. He says, some people say that it's obligatory. Then I would need a bracha just like bread. But the Tosfos say that no, the essential obligation here, this is his reading of Tosfos, the essential obligation is from a verse called the Kadishtem V'Yitem Kedoshim, that we should make ourselves more kadosh, more sanctified. So with bread, where it's a general eating and it's a part of our fixed lives. In their times, remember, it's fairly recent that bread isn't the central of every meal. So for them, bread was the way we defined ourselves. And yet, Talmud Disrach through Truma, and it's a reminder that Kohanim used to have Truma, and that would always come from grain. Whereas here, Kadishtem doesn't really apply, and therefore there's no bracha. That's Aruch HaShulchan reflecting Tosfos, as we've said. And he's according to that opinion, there's no reason to have a bracha today in our times, right? So, because we don't eat pitara, we're not careful about trying to make sure that we maintain this status of tahara, of avoiding things that change our ritual status. But so that's what said. That's what Aruch HaShulchan says. He's an Ashkenazic posek. He's following the Ashkenazic perspective, and that's what he holds. We'll get to the Shulchan Aruch in a second. I wanted to pause because he here reminds us of the 7 liquids, and I can never remember them. I just thought it would be nice for us to, for once, remember the 7 liquids. In halacha, there are 7 liquids that can make produce susceptible to the possibility of tuba. So they are yayin, wine, honey, dvash. Now, honey means honey. Honey means like bee honey as well. Shemen is oil. Chalav is milk. Tal is dew, which is a kind of water, but it's dew. It's seen as different. Dam is blood, and mayim is water. And so yad shachad dam is the way to remember it. Yayin, dvash, shemen, chalav, tal, dam, and mayim. Okay, so those are the 7 mashkin, the 7 liquids that can make things susceptible to tuba. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan, when it comes to Pesach night, the Shulchan Aruch says number 11. Shulchan Aruch said, so by the time the Shulchan Aruch, who's pretty much a contemporary of Rabbi Gidon Makir, but he's already absorbed Rashi and Tosfos so well, he just says, no, we don't make a bracha, and then you take the karpas. The Ramah says, V'yomar b'lashon sh'vinim anashim aktanim, o yifaresh, v'chein asa Rabbi Yehuda milonri, kol agada b'lashon laz, this is not a karpas issue, so maybe I shouldn't say it because this is a Magid issue, but I just thought it was worth noticing. The Ramah says, he uses women and children as an example. The Ramah says the Seder should be conducted in such a way that even those who don't have a great background, even those who are not able to follow in the original maybe, should be made able to follow what's going on. That's just a side point worth knowing. Not an Urchatz point, but a side point. But on the Urchatz question, on the washing our hands, do we make a bracha, do we not make a bracha? In the third line of number 11, the Taz says, we said, the reason we wash our hands is because when you're going to dip produce in water, in a liquid, you have to wash your hands. But he says, I think that means that we should be doing it the whole year. Why would Seder not be different? Now, it's fascinating to me that he uses that phrase, which he knows, as we know, is actually a comment of the fact that Pesach night is different. But he's saying, but on this issue, it's not different. So why would it be different on this issue? So if you're going to tell me that we do Urchatz, he says that obviously shows we should be doing it the rest of the year as well. Now, according to Taz, you would then begin to think about whether or not you should make a bracha on it. But he seems to be understanding Tosfos and Rashi have said that since we don't do this the rest of the year, then we don't make a bracha. But if we started doing it as we should, perhaps, then we would maybe make a bracha, maybe. Then he says, number 12, you might think to yourself, we might think to ourselves that no, maybe Pesach night is so special. We just left Egypt. We want to do things exactly right. Maybe tonight we do it different because we want to be extra good. Right? When, we're just leaving Egypt. We want to do everything exactly right. And therefore, even though the rest of the year we don't, tonight we do. Number 12. He says, if that were true, you're going to tell me maybe the whole idea is we're better tonight. He says, but I know of another time of the year that we do that. During the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, there we do, in fact, try to be better than usual as part of demonstrating to Hashem that we wish we were better. And that when we're repenting, our repenting is a reflection of who we wish we could be. Right? So if you're going to tell me that Seder night we wash for this stuff, because we want to show that we're better. And by the way, if that were the reason, then we would have to have everybody at the table wash, not just the person who's leading the Seder, right? So he says, but it's not true, because we should do it then. He says, this is true. I don't think it's true as much today, but in the time of the Achronim, in the time of the Ramah, the time of the Taz, who lives in the 17th century, the 1600s, I saw you made tshuva, you would only eat bread cooked by Jews, baked by Jews. The other kind of bread is called parakum, right? Today, many people sort of are careful more about parakum because you only buy your bread in the store with a hashkacha, and that means it's not parakum, it's not bread baked by a non-Jew. But there have been times when there are bakeries that bake things, it's very clear that all the ingredients are kosher. So that's not so clear that we're allowed to use it, but there are people who are lax about it. The Ramah says it's a good idea that even if one is lax during the rest of the year, during these 10 days, not to be lax. Now, that's not because the person is saying, all right, I'm going to change and I'm going to be better on this issue the rest of the year. It's more about an expression of a desire to be a more ideal person. Taz is saying, were that our Urchatz practice, we should do it at least then. Elavada, in sort of the second line, number 12 of the third word, what we do to him. He says, it's clearly not true. When we wash Urchatz, Taz is saying very unequivocally, we wash Urchatz Pesach night because that's what we should be doing all year. And it's an embarrassment we don't do it all year, and we should do it all year. In other words, in his view, it's Urchatz is not a new thing. Oh, look at us, we wash our hands for these things at this time of the year. Urchatz says he got on the books because that was what was supposed to be true all throughout the year. This happens to be the one time it's sort of stuck. That's what he says. However, if you look at number 13, so others claim, as the Be'er Hativ quotes, that no, that the general practice is not to wash, and they have what to rely on, because after all, Tosfos said we don't wash the rest of the year. Tosfos doesn't say it's a tragedy we don't wash the rest of the year. Tosfos said we don't. And out to the Magen Avram says, so the Be'er Hativ points out that the Taz took it for granted. We're all just doing the wrong thing. If the Taz was correct, then really we should make a bracha, as the Rambam requires us to make a bracha on this washing, and we should try to wash the rest of the year too. But that's not the opinion, it seems like, of Rashi and Tosfos. And so the Magen Avram and others, and the Be'er Hativ, said it's not true. He said that the practice, it sort of fell into disuse, this practice of washing for these things, and there's no deep need to revive it. But if that's true, then why do we wash Pesach night? So it says the Be'er Hativ in the middle of the second line of 13, the fact that we wash Pesach night, right? So that's a Chilkat Yaakov, I think, or a Chok Yaakov, right? As Mishnah Berurah quotes it as well. He says, no, we do it Pesach night because it's another opportunity to draw the kids' attention, do something different and strange. Like somebody said in the chat box earlier about Manishtana. I wasn't sure Manishtana referred to this thing, but that's sort of the idea. There's one more thing that we do, and the kid will perk up and say, why all of a sudden you're washing for a vegetable? So when I was growing up, I used to ask these questions sometimes, and my parents, Alayhim Shalom, would say, so you should ask. I always thought that was very strange, because what do you mean so I should ask? If that's not an answer, why would I ask? I'm not getting answers. The point is, it's not so you should ask and that's it. Is you should ask, and you should get used to asking, because lots of the questions that you'll end up asking, young child, are going to have to do with the fact that we left Egypt tonight, and we'll get into that conversation. This particular example would be us saying, the conversation would go like this. The kid would say, why are we washing? The answer would be, because originally it was accustomed to wash. You know how we wash for bed, young child? Originally the custom was to wash for these kinds of things as well. Some people seem to think we should continue doing it, and they would have us do it with a bracha, like the Rambam. But others think that we should stop doing it. We're no longer in the practice of doing it, like Rashi and Tosfos, and therefore we don't make a bracha on it. Some people think you make a bracha when you're whispering. We're in that conversation. So there would be an answer. But the reason we're doing it tonight is because we're doing lots of things tonight, because we want you to ask a lot of questions. Because if you ask a lot of questions, we'll get around to the full story that we want to tell. That's the way the Chok Yaakov understood it. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah quotes Chok Yaakov, same idea. Good. So now let's turn on to the second page. Oh, there we go. Is there a second page? There's supposed to be a second page. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Now there is a second page. There we go. Second page. Says the Shulchan Aruch, okay, on this issue. After Kiddush, what do? We wash our hands, because we have the Tibul Rishon. We don't make the bracha. Even if people don't do it the rest of the year, we'll do it during Pesach, right? Because we do this. Right? This Chok Yaakov becomes accepted. Right? So therefore, we get them involved in the conversation. Good. Now, in number 16, really into number 18, this is a set of tshuvot. I happen to have in my Bar Ilan, so it comes up every so often. A man named Rabbi Yitzchak, ben Rabbi Yishai Yisachar Ber Weiss. He was born in 1873. He was apparently a very known as a young prodigy, well-known guy. By 1904, so by the time he's 31, he's the rabbi. By the age of 20, he was a rabbi in his own city. Then he moves to another city. He's the chief rabbi of Verbo. All these things. He was murdered by the Nazis. Most of his writings were lost, and now we have some of them left. So he says, somebody asked me a question. Before I get to this question, somebody asked me a question. Do you think the reason for those who hold that we do not wash, do not do a bracha for vegetables that are wet, most of the time people were tar and tummy was relevant at the time. It's still true that people are tahar and tummy today. It's just today people are all tummy. So we've gotten out of the practice of caring about it. I think that's correct. I mean, the question is whether I think that originally the idea was that we would all maintain these practices to retain our awareness of how all of this works. But we don't do that anymore. That's the answer. We don't do it anymore. But that's the question. That's the issue, right? So we don't do it anymore because we fall out of the practice of paying attention to these issues. But it's not clear that we shouldn't. It's just that we don't. So now this Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss says, Nishalti, I was asked, why do we wash our hands for karpas Why? Now he's asked, why only the Balabayit? Right? Why only the leader of the Seder? Because after all, if you're going to tell me that this is really about that original practice like the Taz thought, then everybody should wash. So why only the whole? So he says, in the second line, he's quoting another sefer about the laws of the Seder, which says, I've seen that most people, it's only the leader of the Seder, the homeowner, and he doesn't make a bracha, and everybody else doesn't wash. And it's not clear. He says not clear why. And the Mariel also says not clear why. And the Mariel, it says there, would tell everybody to wash with him, even though it wasn't their custom. So why do we do it our way? So the Mechaber in Shulchan Aruch says, you wash your hands for the first tibul and don't make a bracha. And then you make the karpa. So I don't understand. In that in the Beis Yosef, also written by the author of the Shulchan Aruch, he quotes the Rambam, and there he writes, "V'cholam mesuminim," all the people who are eating the meal with him. And he doesn't, and that's what the Rambam said. And the Beis Yosef doesn't disagree. He says, okay, and you have this, right? But he doesn't argue. So he argues about whether or not you eat a kazayit, because the Rambam thinks you eat a full kazayit. Others think if you eat a kazayit, a full olive's worth, you'd have to make a bracha achrona. We don't want to do that. That's another argument. That's a karpas argument, which I'm not up to today. So, but it sounds like the Shulchan Aruch accepts the idea that only the Baal HaBayit washes. So what's going on? So it says Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yeshaya Weiss, he says, according to Pri Chadash, this Tibul Rishon, this first dipping, and then he quotes this V'china Barbanel. What I thought was interesting about this is that the Barbanel is not generally known as a halakhic authority. He does have a Haggadah that people used to read. It's a long, unfortunately for the Barbanel, he writes at great length. So it's fallen somewhat out of favor. But he had a Haggadah that was for a long time well used, and it's probably there, which is interesting to watch him in a context that he's not usually quoted. So he says, "Kavanah so shinuyim." They say the whole idea is to do things differently, like we said, so the kids ask questions, right? Because if you ask questions about this, they'll ask us about other things, and that's what Chok Yaakov says as well. So that would make sense that only the Baal HaBayit, only the leader of the Seder would wash, because that's enough. However, I'm in the third line of number 20. There's a Sephardic posting. Now remember, the Rambam says everybody washes with a bracha. So the Sephardic posting says, "Shetan tzadosh kivan shador shnim es ban sheim nerim mitzuma v'tara heizhakim litol v'dvar shelo v'shka min hagabotin v'yodim asokol aseri k'motam." He says it's true. We're no longer careful about tzuma and tahara in general. I mean, the Taz said, if we do it Pesach night, we clearly have to do it the rest of the year. This Rabbi Yishmael HaKohen, this Sephardic posting, the Sephardic authority is saying, no, I don't think that's true. I can recognize and accept that we've fallen out of practice in terms of doing these things ourselves, but the Seder was developed in a certain way. And once the Seder developed in a certain way, we leave it that way. Right? That's the first one, number 21. So that's a whole new idea. So far, we've got, first of all, the original debate about why we're washing our hands. One possibility is we're washing our hands because that's the practice that the Gemara talks about in terms of being careful about tumah and tahara, about ritual statuses of produce and of our bodies. If that's what you hold, like the Rambam, we should do it all the time, and we should make a bracha. A possibility, however, when people in general stop doing this, what do we do? So you might hold like the Taz and say we should still be doing it really. And how do I know we should be really doing it, says the Taz? Because we do it Seder night, so clearly we should be doing it. That's one segment of how to look at this issue. And to say this is just evidence of the fact that we're all falling down on the job. However, Rashi and the Tosafot, by their time, people already weren't being careful about these things. And they said that's just the way it is. People aren't careful about these things. So therefore, they just said we don't make a bracha when we do it Seder night. But they didn't explain why we do it Seder night. If we're going to do it Seder night, why do it at all then? Then we should do it Seder night. So the Taz rejected one possible answer, that we're trying to be better Seder night. And the Taz says that doesn't make any sense, because then we should do it Aseret Yemei Tshuva as well. So that's not the answer that's accepted. So the Chok Yaakov offered the answer that I think is the generally accepted answer. We saw the Aruch HaShulchan too. We saw the Mishnah Berurah. Chok Yaakov said, no, it's part of changing things up. Seder night, because that will draw the attention of people at the Seder, and we'll get them to ask questions, and that will be the springboard to the kind of full conversation we want to have. This Rabbi Shmuel Cohen is offering another idea, also I think an interesting idea. He's saying, no, it doesn't have to be that. He's saying that when the Seder started out, it started out in a time when people were careful about these things in general. So when people stop being careful in general, you might have said, well, we don't have to do it tonight either because now it's lost its meaning. His answer was, sure. But once the Seder got set, we don't change it. That's his answer. That's a minhag avotenu b'yadeinu. We follow the custom of our forefathers. We do the Seder as we saw it. See, so if somebody says to you at the Seder, why do we wash our hands now? We have a range of answers now. One answer is because we really should be doing it during the year, and we're just bad about that, so we do it now, right? The Taz. But it's an embarrassment to us that we don't do it the rest of the year. Another answer is we used to do it, but people fell out of habit of doing it. We keep doing it now to pick with this one, because that's how the Seder was done. So we do the Seder as it's done, even if this particular practice is no longer our practice of the Jewish people. And the third answer is, no, we wouldn't have done it for that reason, but it's a good, convenient way to throw in something that will draw your attention so you pay attention and learn, right? So, yeah, and he offers other options as well that are more technical that I'm not going to go into now because I don't think they're as interesting, right? Good. But now let's look at the Moedim Halacha, number 22. The Moedim Halacha is a book written by Rav Zevin. So when I was growing up, I don't think it's true anymore. When I was growing up, Rav Zevin was like a well-known name. Rav Zevin was I think like the first editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudit, and I think he thought that he was going to finish it in his lifetime. It didn't even come close to that. It's not close to finish in our lifetimes. Big project. He was a big Torah scholar. I think he was Lubavitcher Chassid, a very well-known Torah scholar. Wrote very interesting books. One of them called Hamodim Halacha, where he took up various halakhic issues of various holidays and discussed them. So when it comes to Pesach Seder, he talks about Urchatz be'etzem, Einzo mitzvam yuchel leil Pesach. He says, really, it's not about Pesach night, right? It's just about the general idea when you have things produce dipped in water, right? However, and they bring the halachos in these Sedayim. So he says, nowadays people don't do it. There's a whole debate about what we make a bracha. This is obviously before, so I'm just going through it quickly. I'm in the last line of 22. Right? So he says, during the year we don't do this, and the Taz already wonders about it, which would be a reason today. You can imagine somebody today. I believe my teacher, Urchatz, used to be careful about this, would say, the Taz is a big Torah scholar. I should worry. The Taz think we should be doing it. I should be doing it. But then at number 23, right, that's the Taz. So that's all the Taz. He says, so the Rav Zevin quotes, however, the Netziv in the second line of 23, Hanetziv b'agadato imri shever katav lo kosher midei b'leil zeh so coming to the Zeichel Pesach Hashem bizman hamikdash v'af netilah zo bichlal. Another answer. So far, the answers for why we do it tonight are A, because we should be doing it during the rest of the year, Taz. B, because once the Seder got started that way, we keep it that way. This Rabbi Shmuel HaKohen Asfardi. C, because we want people to ask questions. A whole bunch of people starting with Chol Yaakov. The Netziv says, it's not so much that we leave the Seder as it was, it's that the Seder is about not just commemorating the Exodus, it's about commemorating also when we used to do it in the Korban Pesach. As it happens to be, perfect timing, somebody had just said to me in the chat box, maybe Urchatz is connected to the Korban Pesach. So the Netziv, that I'm pointing out now, was saying something like that. He was saying, in the time of the Korban Pesach, you certainly would make sure to wash your hands before you ate, before you do this, because you want to make sure that you don't get anything tameh. So we do it tonight in commemoration of that. That would be yet another answer for why we do it. So those are all technical, halakhic, legal questions of what are we doing. One possibility is we're fulfilling a halacha that we should be fulfilling all the rest of the year. Another possibility is the halacha we don't fulfill the rest of the year, but we're doing it tonight because that's the way the Seder started out. And so maybe a related answer would be not that it's that because how that it's not just stam, just we want to continue customs. It's because this particular practice brings us in mind of the Pesach sacrifice, which is something we want to do, and remind us of that. That's the tiv. And then the final, most common answer is that it's also a convenient way to draw attention and to get people to perk up. Those are the simple, rationalistic, legalistic, technical ways of looking at Urchatz. And probably, I think this is true, probably the most literally correct answer. If you really ask me why we have only one person wash for Urchatz and not make a bracha, the history of it seems to show it's about doing something that we don't ordinarily do. We want to draw attention to it. We want to make a point of it. And that point is because it's going to get people to think about what we're doing and pay attention and therefore get into it and really delve into the Pesach story. However, I found two examples of another way of looking at it, which I don't think are literally how it started, but I think are very nice things to think about. So if you look at number 24, the Alshich reads the Seder symbolically. It's not only that we have an order for the night, he thinks it's all symbols. So every Jew who's got a mind in their head, a brain in their head, given by Hashem, and is therefore knows recognizes that sadly for almost all of us, with apologies to anybody perfect who's listening in, almost all of us are sunk in various sins we have not yet managed to escape. And decides, no, I'd like to be better. I want to improve myself. So our instinct, many people's instinct, when they realize they're not as good as they want to be, people think I'll do radical things to punish myself or to mortify myself and make myself better in that way. So the Alshich says, Yashua was a major commentary on Nevi'im and Ketuvim, was he also writes at great length, but was well read and well used and very popular. He says, before you reach for the negatives and the difficulty, start with the easier stuff. The Kadesh that's more mutarlo. Start by not indulging everything that's permissible. Meaning the Alshich is saying, he's not the first to say this. He's building up a long tradition, but there's a long tradition that if we just don't indulge ourselves, even in what's permissible, that itself reminds us to be more sanctified people. Not to think of the world as just a pleasure palace to do whatever we want with, but it's meant to serve Hashem. So he's saying when we say Kadesh, we're coming to Seder night and saying, this is the night that we were saved by God, and we want to get closer to God. First step, we're going to try to become holier people. And after that, he says, then cleanse yourself, wash yourself of every kind of guilt. Right? He's taking Urchatz to say that the Seder is about, and I'm not going through the whole Seder what he does, because my topic is Urchatz tonight, but he's saying Kadesh to say, we start the Seder saying, we'd like to be better. First thing we do is we don't indulge. Second thing we do is we cleanse ourselves, not only physically with water, but with tshuva, with repentance, and with the appropriate attitude. And then after, then develop a good character. Meaning, for one thing, don't try to be excessive about things, right? Don't be excessive means don't think you have to eat huge meals and huge and lots of meat and cake and this and that. You can get by with vegetables if you want to, and not to the carbs. So that's the Alshich's more symbolic reading of the Seder. It's about a path towards sanctity, a path towards spiritual elevation that doesn't involve punishing oneself. It involves dedication to improving ourselves and bettering ourselves. First, we decide to become more kadosh. That means we don't indulge everything that we could. Then we cleanse ourselves by washing. That's the Urchatz. And then we remember that means also that excess is often bad. And therefore, we have a little bit of vegetables to remind ourselves that we can really get by on much less food than maybe we think we can get by. That's one symbolic reading. The second symbolic reading, and with this we'll end, the second symbolic reading was by Rav Yosef. You have the biography here in number 26. It was Rav Yosef Mesas or Mashash. There was a Moroccan family who were well known as rabbis in the Sephardic community. He was born in 1892. He became a Rav in Algeria, then in Meknes, and then when he was 72 years old, it was never too late to move to Eretz Israel. 72 years old, he moved to Israel, and then he became, several years later, he became the rabbi in Haifa, and then he passed away at the age of 82. So he says that somebody asked him for the Rimazim, the hints, the implications, the indications of the Seder. He says, similar to the Yasha, but not the exact same thing, Kadesh is about internal sanctification, which means, he says, to repent with a full heart, right? And cleanse ourselves externally, right? So, and he says, as Chazal say, as they do say, that we're supposed to be mitahar ourselves b'regel. That means we're supposed to make sure that we actually go to mikvah, basically, to become tar. So that we go to the Beit HaMikdash, we go to the temple, and we can do all the things about the holiday. But it's another example of seeing Urchatz as a more overall cleansing ourselves. So when it comes to Urchatz, you got the straight and narrow path of pure halakha, of technical questions, technical issues. Even there, we end up thinking that it's likely that Urchatz was not a technical legal requirement. It was more about drawing attention and getting people to ask questions so that the conversation will lead to significant issues about the Korban Pesach. There were, however, those who said it was more about the Seder going the way it always went, or the Seder reminding us of the Korban Pesach at the time of the temple, or maybe, according to the Taz, maybe it was really an example of saying, no, we're not doing all year, we're not doing what we should. And that was the technical legal. And then at the very end, we had the symbolic idea of Urchatz as washing / cleansing ourselves, making sure that we see the path to Kedusha, to sanctity, and we take that path. So that's what I have for you in terms of Urchatz, for the second part of the Seder, the transition from Kadesh to Karpas, and I wish you all a Chag Kasher Sameach, a pleasant and a fulfilling Pesach holiday. Thanks for coming.